secure mobile strategy, networks, apps, BYOD, and more. This is obviously one of those very critical topics. We've heard a lot of folks over the past couple of days talk about mobility. This session is really designed to give you a few different perspectives on some various issues on mobile security. Some of the hottest issues are application security and obviously the BYOD issue. I'm going to go ahead and quickly introduce our speakers and our moderator and then have Wyatt kick it off. To my far left is Elisa Cruz, who's a federal security executive. She is the CISO for FEMA, but now on deployment somewhere and probably coming back. Elisa has worked for the Department of Homeland Security since August 2003. She currently serves, she was serving as the CISO. Previous assignments within DHS include the CISO for FEMA, as well as the Information Systems Security Officer for the National Program and Protection Directorate, Preparedness Directorate, and Information Analysis and Infrastructure Protection Directorate. Dr. Robert Rocky Young, to my right, is a Director of Outreach and Communication for Cybersecurity at DoD. He has been a professor at the IRM College since 2002. Prior to that, he was the Chief of the 11th Wing Information Assurance Office, U.S. Air Force, providing policy guidance, technical support, and administrative oversight of communications, computer, emission, and information security requirements. He spent 21 years in the Air Force and is also a certified physician assistant who continues to work in that capacity. To my far right is David Lingenfelter, the security officer for MOS 360 by FiberLink. David is a seasoned security professional with nearly 20 years of experience in risk management, information security, compliance, and policy development, currently in charge of security and compliance for FiberLink communication, and recently led FiberLink through audits to receive the FISMA authorization from GSA for FiberLink's MOS 360 cloud service offering. David has helped design FiberLink's cloud architecture model several years ago and is an active member of the Cloud Security Alliance and a member of the NIST cloud working groups. And moderating this panel is Wyatt Cash, the editor and director of AOL Government, which is one of our strong partnerships that we have. AOL Government editorial director, Director Wyatt Cash is an award-winning editor and journalist with 3 decades of experience managing and developing business media. He currently oversees editorial operations and development for AOL Government and covers innovation and technology in the government marketing space. As most of you know, before joining AOL, he served as editor-in-chief of Government Computing News and Defense Systems. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Wyatt to get things going.
Well, thank you very much, Param, and welcome. When Param and I started talking about sessions for this June conference and the subject of mobility came up, we got into a really exciting conversations. Of course, that's hard not to do with Param because he's so excited about all the different things he's working on. But legitimately, one of the things that we had come across is in our efforts at covering innovation, and just a step aside, what AOL Government is trying to do is be a little less about news and more about innovation at work in government for professionals in the government space. And within innovation, you know, it's hard really not to talk about how mobility is turning everything inside out. There's so much connected to it, we can't do justice to it, but we do want to talk today about mobility, security specifically, and I'm excited to have these panelists here, which will allow them to speak a bit and also take your questions as well. I do want to present a little bit of research that we had done. I want to recognize Tom Suter out here, who works at ACT-IAC, who was very helpful in helping our organization really find the right players of saying, what are the burning issues that government needs to know about mobility? We work with Market Connections, a research firm, but consulted heavily with GSA and Stephen Van Rokel's office to try to understand, so what are the issues keeping us from moving into mobility and what can be done about it? There's a lot more than we'll present today, but I do want to present a couple of the highlights here. And beginning with one of just the general maturity, how many agencies are really kind of walking, running, or just barely getting started. And the snapshot here, and this, by the way, is based on a survey of about 300 pre-qualified government mobility policymakers, those implementing mobility, purchasing mobility, building the systems that support mobility, and also do system designs for mobile and web-enabled mobile systems. So these are folks that are implementing this both from a citizen services perspective, but also an internal productivity perspective, and represent about 46 different agencies. So we were pretty pleased that we got a pretty knowledgeable cross-section. So in a nutshell, we found about a third of the agencies are at least consider themselves walking or running. About 2/3 are still really just getting started in a variety of ways. Next, we wanted to really understand, so where do you see the potential cost savings, which is an assumption, but we wanted to drill down. And so we found, for example, 82% said it's going to make telework easier. But I thought it was a really interesting point that Malcolm Jackson mentioned this morning. You remember he talked about the Green Book and how people would take all this information when they go out in the field and they go back and then they enter it and upload their pictures. And 75% of these folks said that one of the great cost savings and productivity improvements that they said was allowing employees to complete their work in the field. And there's a real urgency for that because I think intuitively we just understand the quicker we can get them these tools, the better. They also saw a lot of opportunity and productivity enhancements through information sharing and collaborating. We heard a bit about that. Immediate access to agency data to make better decisions. That whole idea that even if you're in your office using Wi-Fi, the data is there when you need to make the decision, not having to go back. And then finally, the ability to respond to emergencies, which a lot of agencies really need to continue to rely on. With that, though, there are hidden costs or costs that we know are going to be there that we can't just dismiss. Yes, we'll save some money. Yes, we're going to have to spend some money. Where were those places? So, number one, there was a sense that there would need to be more spending for wireless and carrier subscriptions. The number for, and cost of new devices, if not bring your own device, that still need to be supported. The security issue was right there, the third item there, 62% said securing multiple mobile devices and platforms is going to be one of those investment decisions that if we just blow by this and expect to get some savings, we're going to be probably making mistakes. So here's ammunition for all of you in this room. And then the help desk support, which I think on one hand there was a comment this morning that said we won't need as much because we're going to have all these tech-savvy people. But if we really have people getting data on multiple platforms and they don't sync, there's going to be a new kind of support that will be needed. One of the most startling things, not so much security related, but I do want to share that we found in this survey was the number of these senior mobile executives who said that enabling employees to work on the go will save not only a few hours, a lot of hours. We found that half said that they felt that workers like them could recapture at least 7 hours per week if they were fully enabled to work mobily, and 19% said you could get more than 12 hours back. So you think of the Green Book scenario again of just lost time, lost productivity, you could be put to better work. We're still trying to figure out if you got the right number of employees and what we spend per hour, and you took some of these numbers and multiplied it all out. There's some number out there that would be pretty impressive. I'm going to try to still get somebody from OPM to give me a valid set of numbers, but I think it's going to be a pretty big one. And more fundamentally, intuitively, it makes sense. Next, we wanted to, there we go. We wanted to talk about, okay, do we have enough investment dollars to do this? And there's an overriding sentiment that says that 60% in fact said no, there's not enough budgeted to really implement the things that would produce these kinds of productivity gains. And in fact, 54%, or when we asked how much would the budget need to increase to meet the needs, 54% said it would need to increase significantly versus what they're being asked to work with. Next, we looked at the barriers, and here's where we zero in on this discussion. What were the most important barriers to getting us further to the point where mobility really does work? And security was by far the number one item that was mentioned. 70% indicated that that was the important barrier. And interestingly, this is one of the places where those in the defense sector kind of had a much higher or different register than those in the civilian sector, where almost 80% said security is the reason we can't get there faster, about 64% in federal civilian agencies. By and large, most of the numbers between defense and civilian were fairly much in sync. But here's another item that I thought was interesting. It's not as high. In fact, it's the bottom of the chart. It says 25%. Said that the lack of understanding and commitment from senior management remains an issue, and that's because they either have a lot of high-level or misconstrued assumptions, or they don't really see that you really do need to get these investment dollars sooner if we're going to make these gains, and they know that they don't have the money. But if they're counting the savings but not really understanding the necessary investment, then we're in a place where this doesn't work. And that would be a shame, because I think we all would agree that we are at this great inflection point, that if we did get the right investment at a reasonable time and at a reasonable rate of spending, think about what we could do. Again, what Malcolm Jackson was talking about is making it easier for our employees to really do their job when they need it most. Lastly, we looked at the specific security concerns, and this may be hard for some of you to read, but there is a handout, and I'd be happy to send a soft copy to anybody. But the biggest concern when it came to security was the possibility of data being compromised. That was 77%. But next was the need to secure both the application and the device. And we'll talk a little bit later, because there's a huge amount of energy about mobile device management. I think that's a legitimate concern. But just as much of a concern we heard was managing really mobile application management, and then, of course, the data that goes through it. Standards and policies scored high. Identity management, we all know, continues to be really the holy grail of how do we control this, but still remains a component of the security barrier. What do we do about BYOD? And finally, what do we do about the possibility of losing the data? Yes?
In that last chart, what's the distinction between data compromise and losing the data?
I think data compromise is you didn't lose the data, like I lost a device. It's just that your data got corrupted, or somebody could mess it up, and it's now in your system, and have you been able to detect that problem? It would be how I'd interpret what our folks said, as opposed to just losing the device and then the data falls in somebody's hands outright. One of the final slides here was, so what do we do about it? And this was, I had a chance to go into Stephen Van Rokel's office and speak with Lisa Schlosser and some of his folks and her folks about just what is it needs to be done. And one of the messages is we don't really need policy. There will be some policies, but what we really need are good articulate roadmaps of what specifically needs to be done, how should it be done, and then sharing tools that provide the applications that can be used, and then the support that goes behind it. And not last necessarily, but very significantly, better acquisition vehicles. So there's a lot that needs to be fixed there as to how do we accelerate the mobile implementation. One of the other interesting things that I think also becomes important for a group in this audience is we asked, so who's doing most of this development of either mobile apps or mobile-enabled websites? And about 3/4 said their government IT staff. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe that's actually a good thing. But one of the issues is, are they as up to speed with what needs to be done with mobile? And are they really equipped to and have the resources to really look at how both citizen service-oriented applications as well as internal applications are working. And my sense is that this is moving so quickly that whole group may not be trained enough, and that there may be a whole other issues about who's doing these mobile apps, even if we agree they should be done. So in conclusion, there's a bunch of summary slides here. I'm not going to read them. I think the takeaway we came away with was that agency executives are very optimistic about the productivity enhancements that are there. They are concerned, and they do struggle with how to get the right level of investment to do it right and do it on time. There also needs to be a clearer roadmap to get there. There is a certain sense that the savings, and I didn't show you slides, there were a lot of assumptions about how much agencies thought they could save if they got rid of desktops and moved to mobile devices. And there was kind of what we found to be a disproportionate expectation of savings than was there. And that sort of suggested, again, why upper management needs to have a clearer sense of the budgets. And that finally, that it really is the savings will not be savings necessarily in the IT department. It would be savings because agencies do a better job managing their whole operations. And therefore, it really becomes incumbent for the IT people to get the CFOs and the upper management engaged in the savings decision to help justify what becomes an IT investment decision. So with that, I'd like to open it up to some questions here. I'll let you turn off that slide there. Again, the research is available. There's a handout. I understand these all disappeared, so that's a good news. But if you didn't get one or you want more complete information on this study, we at AOL Government would be happy to provide that. But now I want to kind of really kick this into, so what do we do about this and to some extent validate some of what we're hearing. And I think one of the places I'd like to start with our panel here, and I'm going to start with Elisa, put you on the spot. On one hand, having been recently at FEMA, but also at DHS, I think you're in a really interesting place. But then, of course, with Rocky and DOD and all your years of experience, and then I think on the vendor side, we're going to get some interesting perspectives. But I thought it'd be interesting to start with what maybe one or two security vulnerabilities that each of you've seen maybe firsthand that ought to be setting up red alert flags to our management and others that, you know, we really need to understand the security implications here. Maybe you could share what you saw, or gee, that was potentially could have been much worse had we not been on top of it, to just kind of put in perspective what we're dealing with as we move to a mobile environment. So let me start with you on that, Elisa.
All right. Can you all hear me hello? Okay, so having recently been the Chief Information Security Officer at FEMA and understanding that our core mission competency is emergency management, one can imagine that our environment is very agile, very mobile, right? Even before mobile strategy became the buzzword, before BYOD became the buzzword, we often showed up into environments that did not have infrastructure, and we brought that infrastructure. We still had, you know, the everyday mission aspects of people gathering data, taking pictures of buildings and bridge infrastructure. I didn't know until I joined FEMA that FEMA was also the national regulator on flood insurance. So geospatial data is very important to us and how that moves and how weather impacts that, as well as what actually happens in the actual disaster perspective. How do we capture that data? We have inspectors going out, taking pictures of things. We have people interviewing survivors of particular disasters. We have a volume of users, anywhere from the survivor themselves applying through for benefits through our application processes. We have our state, local, county, tribal partners. We have volunteers showing up on the scene. So as you can imagine, we have a plethora of challenges to overcome. So what I found from a security perspective, one of the biggest things is access management to the data. Who gets access? How much access do they get? And what should they be seeing?
Rocky, would you like to share an anecdote? I'm sure you've seen your share.
Yeah, we've had a good time. So you've seen Mr. Kai's policy. It came out, DOD CIO. So we had struggled with that for over a year. So the challenges that we had, and we've got over 100 pilots in the Department of Defense running right now. So we're actually learning through things. But it's kind of funny because you showed your progression of how we were crawling. My guys are running with M16s on their phones. Okay, so we aren't crawling. We're running and shooting and doing things that we can do. But with that comes the huge problems of how durable these items will be and the expense of an iPad that takes a hit. We also have them in our aircraft. We're using them in our helicopters, and we're using them for maps. But having been an Air Force flyer, you know, being the guy that had to go to survival school and get chased and escape an invasion, the question I brought up was more of, how long will that battery work in that iPad that's my maps when I've been shot down and running for my life? You know, if I'm in China, it might be convenient to grab a charger, because that's where they're mostly made, right? What are you going to do with that? At least you're all awake. Okay, it's a good thing. So, but having gone to a meeting, they didn't expect Dr. Young to know anything about aircrew, because that was my enlisted days. So it's kind of fun. But I said, maybe we would put a solar charger on it. Maybe you'd put something else on it. So there's a lot of things. And it doesn't have to be an iPad. It could be any of the mobile tablets. But what does it save us is the cost for fuel, right? The weight of those maps that we carry in our parachute packs on fuel every flight that you don't use. So, and also the availability to update them. So my guys are using them for medical. We're using it for equipment. We use a accelerometer on a chest to see it rise and fall. So it's actually really neat stuff we're doing. So, and Mr. Kaya said we will not let security stop innovation, which is great. We're just going to do it. We're not going to say no. We're going to say yes, but, and do our best with the pilots to prove these things.
And David?
Sure. Yeah, I think from the vendor perspective, I see a little bit different what's going on, and everybody's running so fast. To your point, everybody's going very quickly that security is being compromised. People just want to implement, they want to deploy as quickly as possible. The bottom line is it's the data that's at risk, it's the data that's being exposed. And there's hundreds of ways that it can be. I've lately been flying a lot, and I've kind of been keeping track, watching as I leave the plane on the flight crews and how many phones they pick up out of seats that people have left behind. And I'd say probably out of the last 10 times I've been on a plane, I've actually watched a flight crew pick up a phone at least 5 times, 50% of the time. 3 times in first class. I'm guessing people in first class probably have a lot of good information on their phones.
And they were drunk.
But, what's that?
It's the free liquor.
Is that? Got it.
Sorry.
I got to work that into, one of the security concerns is free liquor in first class, but please continue.
That's
But basically-
education, actually, yeah, so you're good.
But basically, it comes down to, are these being protected already, or are they not? So people are using the devices, people are developing for the devices, and it's being deployed very quickly, and I think security's kind of being put on the back burner for the sake of business, for the sake of, let's take this new paradigm and really push it and advance it and make it the de facto way of doing business. And just in general, I see from a lot of our customers, they're coming to us, a mobile device management company, saying, we already have a problem.
Well, that leads probably to another question, and I made the assertion that I think we're moving beyond mobile device management, which I saw some nodding heads, and but not to exclude that it's really that plus mobile application management.
Absolutely.
So my question is, where do you see the attention and resources going over the next 12 to 18 months? What must agencies and folks like you really make sure? Is it an integrated approach? Is it something more? How would you describe what we must focus on?
From my perspective, I found that data rights management and data loss protection, which we're not paying as much attention today as we should. At the end of the day, regardless of what platform, version 1, 2.0, 3.0, however you're going to allow access, however you're going to enable authentication, if you don't know who has access to your data, you're already dead in the water. Oftentimes, agencies don't even know what kind of data they have, who needs access to it, and how it's being managed. In fact, the first time I heard the term data warehouse, probably about 5 years ago, I told my team, look, I need to change my image of what a data warehouse looks like in my mind. Right now, it's a bunch of shelves with bins in it and ones and zeros. So we need to help basically expound upon that and help people understand the importance of protecting data. At the end of the day, we didn't want people who had survived all kind of disasters out there that when they applied for their benefits on FEMA's networks also lost their identity.
Okay, so with the challenges in DoD are very much typically the same. Are you protecting the device, or are you protecting the information on the device? So we're looking at the mobile device managers and the applications, and how do we get the applications and get a hash value from them, know that they are validated, that maybe DISA designed the app, DISA locked it down, secured it. So the big question is, if someone builds your app, how do you know what it does? How do you not know if that the iOS is leading back to a mother Apple ship? Is it not tunneling back and maybe getting some information? So for us, it's device agnostic. Doesn't matter what we're going to use, smartphones or whatever, but it's the data that we're really worried about securing. Other questions we have is the understanding of the device itself. Help desks are going to be huge, we mentioned that, but your executives, also roles to what they have access to. Movement of general officers are considered confidential in the Department of Defense. So are you going to allow them to start putting things on their calendar and put maps on their calendars and their secretaries putting stuff, pushing it to this mobile device that could then be considered confidential and the cost of having to wipe them? So I think it was interesting, the point about 5 phones left in an aircraft that you saw. It's about $30,000 to an organization to figure out what they've lost on a notebook. Now, 64 gig, right? We've got a nice big iPhone juicy information there. So if you encrypt it and compress it, that's a huge amount of information. So acceptable use policies, postures, and roles are huge things that we're working on. But I think that you guys have become numb to the yellow, red, green stoplight issue. So I'm proposing that we go with blue, like we're being choked. that gray, you're almost dead, not yet, but you're getting there, and then black. Because I think you guys are numb. I think everyone's become numb, because when I say mobility is a huge issue, it's a security issue for us, and this is what could happen, people will go, okay. So, but for me, it's lives. It's soldiers and sailors in war zones and stuff. It's not just an executive leading something in an airport. So that's my challenge. Thanks.
So we need a new color scheme.
I like it. The blue, you're just being choked. Gray, you're, you've been really sick and been gray. Look in the mirror, and then black. You ain't coming back.
David, I dare you to top that, but maybe.
I'm not even going to try.
But you actually have an interesting perspective because you deal with multiple organizations. So what are you guys working on?
Well, they both said it. It's the data. Everybody's worried about the data leakage, privacy, personal privacy. Is too much data coming back to the managers and the administrators. I think over the next couple years, excuse me, you'll see mobile device management become a standard similar to firewall or intrusion detection systems. That has to be there. But that's not what you're going to be protecting. You're not protecting the devices. I completely agree on that one. The devices are going to be agnostic. They're going to be changing. They are changing right now every 9 to 12 months. People are swapping out the devices and just simply porting everything they had on the old one onto the new one. So it does come down to the data. It comes down to application security, making sure that security is built into the applications, making sure that that application is handling and distributing the information correctly, and then the data itself. Who has access to it? What are they doing with it? Where are they putting it?
So let me ask this, and then I'm going to open it up to you all. So we talk about bring your own devices. So I'm curious, as with the rapid evolution of that, how do agencies keep up with that? Even if they've got their data controls in place, it's hard to anticipate, as you said, or I guess, Rocky, you said about, does an Apple iPhone send, the general's calendar back to Apple's mothership, and what does that mean? So how does one anticipate even what that will be like as we get new devices? So just briefly, how do you see the evolution of, and what do agencies actually need to do to mitigate the threats that will continue to evolve with new generations of bring your own devices? David, may I put you on the spot?
I think some of that starts with putting policies in place on what is allowed and what is not allowed for the types of data you're protecting. So obviously, if you're protecting national secrets, things like that, you may not want to allow BYOD devices. But when they are coming in, the first thing has to be a user acceptance. The user has to accept that they have to follow the regulations in order to get to the information that the agency is trying to protect. From there, the agency, again, depending on what they do, can back off how much information they get back from that device that's not agency data. So again, it comes down to data. It has to be that the agency is letting the end user know, if you want to connect to my information, you have to accept my terms on how we're going to handle it should the device become lost, stolen, unusable, or in our opinion, rogue, meaning if there's something on the device that the agency has not approved.
Additional thoughts, Rocky?
I would bring the same answers that he said. Understanding the device acceptable use agreement has to change in addition to the one you've got on the network. So just normal network use. And then tell me, what are you going to get rid of if you bring your own device? Do I get to get rid of your laptop? Do I get to get rid of your desktop? What are we going to get rid of? Because you can't have a desktop, a laptop, a tablet, and a smartphone. Because that's not efficiency. That's just adding more stuff and more ways for us to get into the network.
No,
so whenever
it's really cool.
It's really cool. It really is. But again, the battery. What are we going to do when we're shot down? We're going to run around for 4 different battery charges? Okay, sorry. So that would be acceptable use policies. And then the policy before launch. None of us have policies in place, and we're all launched off with the shiny bauble that's out there. So that's the thing that I have a concern of, is that we're all running so quickly and the shiny bauble is in front of us. So something that we wanted to talk about, and what are you going to get rid of? The other thing is that I need to, the relation to the data is the same thing. In the Department of Defense, how do we know, and if you all experienced Earthquake Day, I did, it was a nightmare. When I went outside to try to get my BlackBerry to work, and we were outside, my BlackBerry didn't work, but everyone around me was twittering and taking pictures. Oh my gosh, did you feel that? I'm just trying to call back to see if one of my Crystal Gateway buildings was damaged, and if we all evacuated out. So when you start thinking about these mobile devices, start thinking about the connectivity in the cloud, the connection to what you have. Because a mobile device that has no connectivity is a brick. Okay, you can use it as a weapon in the Department of Defense. We can strike you with it. or whatever. So, but you have to start thinking about your connectivity. And don't just think about in the US, guys. My connectivity is global. So I have to start worrying about spectrum in foreign countries. So huge challenges that we have, but again, no problems, no barriers, challenges. It's all yours.
So, from my perspective, I think what we don't talk about, which we really need to get more serious about, is accountability. And that's accountability from the user all the way up to the VIP. That, you know, you're responsible for your data. Who would have thought 10 years ago that you would be doing your own banking? You know, when that first came out, we're like, we're pushing back. But now everybody's doing it, right? If you hardly even go into the bank anymore. And even banking institutions themselves are actually reducing their hours and getting rid of that kind of stuff. But what we're not doing is holding people accountable for the data. Even today, when you go onto whatever sites you're on, you individually are held responsible for your security or lack of security that's happening through your connectivity to that particular thing, whether it's VeriSign or what you have on your own laptops or not. Whether your stuff was secure or not, that onus is coming back to the user. And I don't think that today, while we're moving more and more, the technology piece is always easy, but we're always leave the people process, the culture changes and the understandings. The real return on investment is that when we start making everyone accountable and everybody's doing security. So then it's not just security showing up at the table as this last ad hoc thing that we're trying to hang off of the new thing that we're doing. And then so I would say accountability and education, awareness and education would be kind of what ties the bow on what we're trying to do here.
Great. Let's sort of open it up to you all. Who has some questions they'd like to ask the panel here? Yeah, Mark.
I guess I have a scenario and then maybe for some feedback. I was with RIM for 10 years for 2001, the past decade. So back then, when things came on board, you know, senior managers were getting BlackBerrys for command and control devices. And at that time, most government employees didn't have an iPhone or a smartphone. Fast forward to today, just like you have a car, almost everyone has a smartphone. And there's sort of this comparison between my work device and my personal device. In the corporate world, the reason BYOD has taken off, I think, is that cost is no longer borne by the company, and it's borne by the employee who's sort of paying it anyway. So that's been a big impetus for pushing that cost from the subscription, which, rounding it up to $100 a month times 12, it's about $1,000 per year for recurring. So in my observation, again, government space, GS12 and above, you want a device you're good. Below that, probably a harder justification. But almost all those people have their own smartphone devices. So you have the potential to have telework and a broad portion of the population who you can't really practically pay for with a subscription, but could be open for DoD. So it seems like you categorize the data for what's available for public consumption or SPU. That's kind of the approach. That's kind of the potential, I think, short term to kind of have telework and pervasive computing available without the more onerous restrictions of SPU and more sensitive to PII data. So I'm just wondering if that's in the discussion or if that's too much.
Well, I guess the question is between the reduction in cost, the ubiquitous availability, and as we get into a 4G LTE world where data now is probably even more important than voice, which I think is another driving factor. We can actually do something on these phones besides text and chat, introduces a new set of dynamics for security. So I guess the question would be, in light of how we're evolving, how would you respond to that observation, and what do you think's ahead?
Okay, well, I'll take the RIM because we're still using RIM products, BlackBerry products, and we use them because of the CAC sled. We're able to sign and encrypt them at email. I can send and do things. So that would be a challenge that we still have. Playbook works with it, so I can actually read documents as an executive. The problem that we have is the speed and the sexiness, and it's not what they expect. But if we update our information, we'll have it. The other reason that in DoD, you can't bring your own tank, you can't bring your own aircraft carrier, you can't bring your own uniform. So there are some things, sorry, we'll chat later, I'll pay you. Okay. So, but that's the challenge that I have, is that I need to get the secure devices, which I have in place with the common access card, with the sled and all that. So we have all these issues that HSPD-12, PIV cards that were supposed to be mandated, sign and encrypt all emails. So the PKI comes in. So for us, the challenge is with the BY, yes, I could say in industry that it might be cheaper, but our industrial-based partners are just as worried as we are about these mobile devices. MIT Lincoln Labs, all of our partners in DoD, they're just as worried, and they're learning from us to try to, we educate them when we find new assaults and stuff. So the perception and reputation is something I'm worried about. So if Sergeant Snuffy has his mobile device that he did his BYOD, and he's doing research at the airport waiting for a flight in uniform, what if that research is looked at by someone over their shoulder and deemed unacceptable? Porn, research, whatever. How do we hold that person accountable now because it was his BYOD and he was off duty? You, big brother, your ethics, your standards may be different than mine. So start that fight and talk to your general counsel and see how we're going to deal with that. Because I would say I was on my own time and it was research I was doing. So that's a perception thing that I have. So as we're working forward with this, we want to get our own devices secured in DoD. They'll be your official device. And then with your own devices, BYOD will come. But I don't see us running and jumping on that bandwagon straight away. There's just too many potholes. They aren't going to take us off the road, but wow, it could really be a perception issue. Sorry about that.
How about some other questions? Patty?
Are you thinking about priority service with mobile devices?
Like after Earthquake Day, you mean?
I'm sorry?
Like after Earthquake Day, you mean? The people have the priority services access when they need it?
Right.
You're FEMA. I can answer after you.
So we are looking, standardization I think is going to be key to how well mobile strategy that has a security strategy imbued in it. If you're not looking at standardization on how your delivery is coming in, how your services are coming in, and your equipment, all of those represent vulnerabilities, all of those represent effectiveness of your network or how your data is moving, how your data is being stored. So from our position, we're looking at how we're standardizing.
And our senior leaders have access and priority due to nuke and other things that they do have. So they do have priority through. But the problem would be for me as a denial of service on that access point. So if an adversary is trying to purposely bring down the entire access point, it won't matter if they have priority because they're going to have to find another tower that's going to accept their service. So but in a metropolitan place, that shouldn't be a problem. Walk a block and you'll have 3 more towers. So that's the question we have is how do we get around that? Is it an encrypted tunnel? Are you using a sat phone versus a GSM, CDMA? So there's many different challenges we have, but in the tactical environment, we don't have those same type of problems. But we are considering.
David, any additional?
From our side, we deal less with the telco side, but we're seeing DHCP pool exhaustion in the enterprise space very quickly. People are bringing in multiple devices. You go into a conference room, you've got your laptop, you got your cell phone, you got your tablet, all in one IP address now. So we're seeing that companies, industry is having to upgrade and expand just their own infrastructure, what they're capable to accept, and otherwise they're giving themselves a denial of service because there is so many new devices coming in so quickly.
Yes, sir.
With new devices coming out constantly, new major releases of operating systems constantly, new applications coming out daily, and updates to them, how concerned are you about the supply chain, and what's the strategy to approach it?
Is that me? Okay.
Go, Rocky.
Go, Rocky. Yeah. Okay, so the defense debate, and we have SCRM, right, supply chain risk management, and we're looking at it. So everything's with ones and zeros. So if Mr. Kai, we're working on a new cyber defense strategy, and that is a huge issue for us. But in the same breath, you have to remember that an insider in a U.S. facility could do the same thing, could implant something into the software or hardware. So it's more of, like you said, looking at the device itself, evaluating it, putting it into a cage, and seeing what it does. Zero-day exploits and things like that could happen. So, but yes, we are indeed worried about it. That's why we don't want all, say, Apple devices, all BlackBerry devices, HTC. So we actually like that, having the spread through the hetero versus homo Genius network. So we are worried about that. It is a huge issue. And it was something that was brought up recently by a number of DoD personnel and a number of our DIB partners because they are buying the same equipment and putting it into the systems. So that is under one of our, I can connect you with who's working on that in the DoD CIO, but it's a huge challenge. And the thing is that I don't think we can get wrapped around the axle and stop everything, because that would stop everything, right? Every 6 months we'd have to look at everything, and we're finding that the support for mobile devices is 6 months. After Galaxy 3 comes out with Sprint, 6 months later, it won't be the Galaxy 3 anymore. So it's this huge thing with, we don't want it to have devices, we want it to be more agnostic about an operating system or something. So, but it is a huge issue for us, and we're actually evaluating anything that has ones or zeros, hardware, firmware, and software will have to be evaluated for issues with the supply chain.
Yeah, I think that whole issue brings to light the point that it has to be about the data and not the devices. As we've been saying up here all along, is the devices are changing too quickly, the apps are changing too quickly. You have to make sure you understand where the data resides, who has access to it at all times, so that you don't have to get hit as much or be as concerned about supply chain, the next update to Angry Birds being able to get in and infiltrate all the data that's on the phone. You need to make sure that that data is segmented, is secured within the phone, so that any update or any change to the environment won't impact it.
I got the 5-minute sign, so I think one more question, and did you have a question there too? So we'll have to make them fairly quick.
Sure. Actually, mine's somewhat related to the last, and it's more about working with the vendor community and the vendor developers. Are you thinking about trying to have a, I guess, a custom spin that they would develop for the devices, you know, so an iOS version or an Android version or a BlackBerry version where you have the ability to say, okay, you know, cameras are off, you can't remotely activate the microphone, you know, a number of issues that would come up in a secure environment as a way to try to mitigate some of the
Right.
So, I'll take that one first. I mean, that's basic standard mobile device management strategy. You put some control around the device where you do have the options to say, when you're in this environment or when you're in this vicinity, the camera has to be turned off or YouTube has to be disabled. So that to me is the groundwork of all this, from mobile device management, mobile app management. You have to have that policy in place that says, here's the bare minimum that we're going to put on this phone to manage it, and this is what that bare minimum is going to enable us to do, which is either disable the camera or disable a microphone or something like that, and that comes down to just basic device management.
So we're working with SRGs, with stakes, and now we have SRGs from DISA. Go to their information assurance, iasc.disa.mil website, and you can actually look it up and see what we're doing with the devices and partnering. So we do have Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, these organizations actually making phones for their own people to use because of the sensitivity of what they work on. The intellectual property is huge of what's being sucked out of these corporations. So for us, we actually love that they're starting to do that, and they're starting to build to our STIG and SRG requirements. With that, we can't rely on user-based enforcement to turn off a camera, turn off a microphone. So with the BES and some of the other mobile device managers, we can do that. So those are huge issues that we have, but we are working with the vendors. We meet with the vendors often, but just like us, it's a 6 months, 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. So it's more looking at the mobile device manager that can just, doesn't matter that it's a 6 months, it's a new device. We're just going to shut it down through the operating system.
Yep.
If not, put it in a box, right?
And on the federal side, we had trade-offs. You know, do you focus on doing security on a device or focus on the data? So if we treat, depending on the situation, the device as untrusted, then we're not worried about the device. We're only protecting the data. So it depends on the scenario, on what works best. And I think until industry, or we all collectively, federal, DOD, and industry all start moving collectively towards the same end goal in our mobile strategies, that we'll continue to have these type of things that we need to solve.
And then last real quick question.
I thought that the statistic you threw out there about 7 hours a week in savings, 50% of the people said they were going to save 7 hours a week or more. I mean, I've run a lot of analysis around these numbers, and over the course of doing talks here, and I used to say 2% savings for 1,500 employees is $1 million a year. If we're talking about 7 hours a week, you're talking about an 18% efficiency kick. I mean, how can you afford not to be doing this? I mean, that's $1 million for 150 employees a year.
Well, and keep in mind that's process improvement. It's changing the way people work. It's at a management level that goes way above IT, and all the more reason to say, let's get the IT investment to secure these things as quickly as possible.
And I get on the DoD side. That's a whole
Okay,
different
long as you get it right, because people are on their phones on escalators talking about official stuff. We've heard them.
I mean, that's.
We would like you to be at home in a safe and secure place, and if you're teleworking. So that's also the time in and out of the office. That's telework time you're saving. So, I mean, to drive into DC, to drive to NSA from the Pentagon, that's an hour and a half in bad traffic. So I see where those hours could come in. But for DoD, we can't do it.
Well, I wish we could continue this, and I'm sure we can at the break. Let's give Elisa, Rocky, and David a round of applause, and thank you very much. I think, I don't know if someone's coming in to tell us what's next, but I guess we're now taking the break at 2:20 to move into our next session. So thank you very much.
And we'll take your mobile devices if you don't want them.